I remember that, yeah.
Hey, Christina.
Hey, Jean Marie, how are you? Long
Good,
time
how are
no see.
you? I know.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
I just had the opportunity to meet John this last week. We had
Oh, cool.
our intro Zoom, which was great.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and of course, Dawn. Hi, Dawn.
Hi there.
Dawn
Welcome.
who? No.
Ken, I know you through your son. Your son teaches my son science at Cheverus.
Oh.
Yeah, we won't say any more than that.
I think it's the first time.
We're really not related.
I think my father just found out what I do for a living. Christina, I don't know if you're going to get along with this council with this positive attitude and smiles you're bringing here. We're going to have to.
I will get very somber very fast. Don't worry.
Give us an hour. We'll take care of it.
Okay, we are live on YouTube, and I'm going to pause until I see the on-air symbol here in Chambers, and we'll get started. And John, Ken, or Jean Marie, or Dawn, if you want to just wait, if you see Betsy come into the audience, just give me a wave and I'll bring her in.
Okay.
I think we'll be good to go in a couple seconds.
Betsy's in the audience now. Oh, you got her.
Yeah, there's no on air yet, so just, yeah, go ahead if you want to tell them. Okay, I think we're ready to go. So welcome, everybody. This is the December 9th, 2020 workshop of the Scarborough Maine Town Council. We have two items on our agenda today. The first item is going to take up the majority of our time, which is we have some guests here from GPCOG, which I'll introduce shortly. And it's regarding to regional transportation for Scarborough, and particularly more specifically the Downs project. And then afterwards, we will transition into a brief discussion on the possible sale or purchase, I should say, of the Masonic Hall located at Dunstan Corner in Scarborough. So with that, again, welcome everybody. I just take a quick second. The origins of this workshop is, as many of us here know, a lot of our discussions have been centered around the Downs project, and a lot of our tough decisions for the last 2 or 3 years have been very much intertwined with the Downs. And I think one of our blind spots as a council has been how the Downs interacts with the greater Portland area and region as a whole. And specifically, I think traffic is traffic and transportation, maybe more accurately, is just a puzzle I think we would all be better to explore a little bit more. So on my own, I reached out to Christina Egan, who is the executive director of the Greater Portland Council of Governments, and essentially just asked her if she'd be willing to take the time to sit with us for an hour, hour and a half, and help educate and let us pepper her with any questions that are necessary. So again, the purpose of the workshop is just to learn, hopefully, and get a better understanding of the regional impact of the Downs project. So that is, with that, Christina, I think I'm going to hand this over to you again. And she's joined by Chris Chop from Greater Portland Council of Governments as well. And really briefly, before Christina, you can keep sharing your screen, Chris. I just wanted to quick plug for GPCOG. GPCOG's a regional organization that I know as my first year as a counselor, I really didn't utilize much. And my second year as a counselor, I started to tap into some of their resources, and I'd encourage any and all of us to, when we do get those emails from them, to open them up and spend some time with them, because I have found their organization incredibly helpful. I think they truly understand not only the challenges of, let's say, the region and towns in the area, but they also understand and respect our position as counselors. So I have found their willingness to appreciate what it's like to be a decision maker to be very refreshing and helpful for us. I think Mr. Hamill would probably echo my comments as well. So
Absolutely.
Now with that, Christina, I will turn it over to you. I apologize.
No, Paul, thank you so much for that really nice introduction. I think part of the reason we are able to work with our elected officials so well as some of us have been elected officials, and I used to be a Freeport town councilor before I became the executive director of GPCOG. So I've sat in your seat. I know how hard the job is. I know how many topics you're trying to juggle and understand and do right by your residents. So it's great to be here. I am joined by Chris Chopp, as you said, Paul. He is our awesome new transportation director. And we also have Tony Scavuzzo, who is the general manager of the Biddeford, Saco, and Old Orchard Beach Transit, and Greg Jordan, who is the general manager of Metro. I think they're in the attendees buckets right now, but I know that they'll be joining us on screen for the question and answer period. So as Paul said, Paul, Don, and Tom all asked us to just provide a very quick overview to you of GPCOG. We do a lot of public transportation work, which we're going to talk to you about traffic and transit and the Downs tonight for the majority of our time. But I did want to give you an overview of what GPCOG does so that you as counselors and as staff can engage with as many of the things that we're doing as you have time for and interest in. So I'll start just by saying we were founded over 50 years ago, and our purpose is to help cities and towns do together what you can't do alone. And those are things like making sure that the region has a strong economy, that we have safe infrastructure, and kind of specialized work that's harder for every town to have its own capacity. What you see here is a vision that came from elected officials a few years back of a thriving, sustainable, prosperous, vibrant region, you know, that has good roads and healthy people and affordable housing options and a sound environment. So some of the things that we've done in our history that may be familiar to you is that GPCOG was kind of the catalyst for Eco-Maine, for the waste management in the region. We helped create the first crime lab for the region. Right now, we're focused a lot on housing choices and balancing that with the open space and natural resources we want to retain. We regularly convene all of the managers. So Tom meets on a bi-weekly or monthly basis with his peers. We invite elected officials to come together in their own gatherings to talk about the challenges that you have in doing your job. Our public works directors meet together. And then in January, we're starting a new offering where we're going to be convening all of the planners of the region as well. On the right-hand side, we call ourselves kind of we're your Swiss Army knife. We are organized to quickly respond to the challenges and opportunities of the time. You know, 2020 has been the most challenging year that I have ever lived through. We had to pivot very quickly to help our cities and towns figure out how to do virtual public meetings, maintaining public access and compliance with the federal and state open access laws. We provided our Zoom account early on to many of our smaller communities so they could run meetings like this. We've been advocating for money for local and states, for localities and for states through the Recovery Acts. This picture here is a woman who we provided $100,000 to American Roots, which is a Westbrook-based business that converted it's like fleece making to PPE. So that's the kind of thing that we can do to kind of turn on a dime. And right now we're in the middle of distributing the economic recovery grants for the state in our region. We've distributed about 50 million and we're about to distribute more for restaurants and tourism. So that's the kind of work we've done this year. Last year, we helped with asylum seekers. John Cloutier, who I think maybe on your bench, I can't quite see, was active in that, as was Tom, as was Paul. And that was something where we had to pivot really quickly at the request of our members to help with the new folks that arrived from Africa last summer. But we do lots of other things. So overall, our mission is to help the region adapt and thrive in a really rapidly changing world. Chris, I'll go to the next slide. We are governed by you. Scarborough is one of our members. There's a General Assembly. Some of you are on it. And you set our budget, you set our staff, our executive director, and set our strategic direction. So we take our marching orders from our cities and towns. In the next slide. We have some official roles at the federal level. We are the federally designated economic development district. That means we work on economic strategy. The meeting I had before this, we were coordinating with the Chamber and USM, Visit Portland and others to think about how we need to work on broadband expansion, affordable housing, and other kinds of things that relate to our economic recovery during the pandemic. We're also a federal metropolitan planning organization, and we're going to talk to you a lot more about that. But basically, we program federal transportation funds, about $6 million a year in highway funds, and about $20 million a year or so in transit funds. This year, we're actually programming $53 million in transit funds because of the CARES Act. And then lastly, we are a regional planning council. And what this means is that, and that's under state law, we look ahead, we plan ahead, we try to see what's coming over the horizon and help you as cities and towns deal a lot with growth and development issues. Next slide. So some of our member services I'll highlight for you. We help you buy your road salt, for example, getting it at a better price than what you could get alone. So we help save you money on a variety of different products. And then we provide engineering and legal assistance. Right now, we're helping you with the MS4 stormwater permitting. So a bunch of communities have come together and we've hired an engineering firm to help get a stormwater permit for the area. We also have, we're working with you to try to get fees that are owed to you from cable TV. These are franchise fees. So that's a place where we hired the best national firm, legal firm to help us make sure that you get what you're owed. We also do community planning, we do comp planning, we do coastal resilience. We funnel monies from the Environmental Protection Agency to clean up older industrial contaminated properties. So we've done, millions and millions of dollars of work throughout the region. We're doing broadband planning, particularly out with the Lakes region communities who have substandard broadband service. And then recently, we're offering some new services to you around sustainability and also strategic communications. Here's Tom and Don. This was at an event, I think it was last year. We have our welcome and congrats event for new elected officials. John, I hope that you can come this next week. That's at 6 p.m. on 12/17. That's one of our regional convenings where we bring people together to get to know each other on a regional basis. We also have a Metro Region Coalition, which Scarborough is part of. It's 7 municipalities that work together on issues that are more urban in nature. We have regular coffees with COG in the morning. We had one last week to get a briefing from the state on the new climate action plan. We've done ones on resiliency. We'll do some on transportation coming up. We do these pretty regularly. They're just educational events for you to get up to speed on issues. Chairs in a circle, we invite the chair and vice chair of councils to come together with other chairs and vice chairs and mayors across the region. This is a peer group where you can talk about what's going on and learn from one another. And then we have an annual summit every year, which is our big event. And we go through the things that we've accomplished for the region and what's upcoming. And I think that's the last slide about COG before we dive into transit. But Paul, is there anything else that you want me to add, or Don, anything that you want me to add to that about your experience with GPCOG? Nope.
No, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris, and he's going to walk you through some background about traffic and public transportation in the region. And then we're going to tell you a little bit about a study that we're working with the town on to look at the potential for more public transportation in Scarborough.
Great. Thanks, Christina, and thank you all for having us tonight and the opportunity to chat a little bit about transportation in Scarborough and specifically transit. We'll start just as a game plan. We'll start by zooming out and touch on some demographic trends, travel patterns, existing transit services in the region, because it's all related. And so just zooming out to population, we know that Scarborough is growing, right? So between 2010 and 2018, when you look at the percent of Cumberland County's population growth by municipality, see that Scarborough actually led the county and accounted for 12% of the county's overall growth in that period. So there's definitely potentially growing pains. As far as population by age group, well, we know Scarborough is getting older as well. In 2018, over 35% of residents were 55 and over, which is up from about 30% in 2010. In 2018, there were fewer residents in that 20 to 34 age group. So you see 11.7% compared to the county as a whole. The county, Cumberland County, in that age group is more like 20%. So we know the town is getting older, and it just provides a little bit more context as we move forward through this slide deck. Traffic's increasing as well, as you all are aware, and whether you've seen the numbers or not, you probably feel it, particularly on Route 1 in Scarborough. There's sections of Route 1 that are with over 25,000 vehicles per day, which is pretty significant, in some of the highest traffic volumes in the region on roads that are not interstates. And you'll see number 1 there showing Route 1 on the map there. At Route 1 in Haggis Parkway, where traffic increased by 26% between 2013 and 2019, which is pretty significant. Further north towards South Portland, you see right around Maine Medical Center's campus at, I guess, 100 Campus Drive, you see an increase of about 7%. That will likely go up as Maine Med expands its campus and operations in that area. And stepping back to that number 1, that will likely go up as the Downs continues to grow and develop. So traffic is growing. We know that population's growing as well. The two are related. And we zoom out to regional traffic volumes just to provide a little bit of perspective. And you'll see the interstates are the darkest colors on this map, showing the highest daily volumes. But Route 1 is not so far behind, in the Scarborough area. It's pretty significant, actually. And one thing to note about this map, just as a cautionary tale, that certain portions of the interstate are broken down in northbound and southbound, so this may not accurately reflect the total volumes. But even with that caveat, Route 1 in Scarborough still has higher traffic volume than you'd see on I-95, northbound and southbound, in areas like Gray. So just kind of tells you about the magnitude of traffic in this area, as you all understand. And as of 2017, about 82% of Scarborough residents actually commuted outside the town on a daily basis. That was up from the year 2000, where it was more like 75 to 78%. This shows the regional transit network by transit provider. And you can see all these different colors. I'll be frank, it is a fragmented system, right? There's 7 different transit providers in the region, but it's getting better. There's more and more coordination and collaboration across providers, and we'll speak to that in a little bit. But one of the takeaways, obviously, is that, and I've heard this from folks in Scarborough, that it's kind of the hole in the donut, right? There's Scarborough is generally underserved by transit, particularly for a community its size in the region. We can zoom in a little bit and just look at the Scarborough area, and you'll see there's service on I-95, Biddeford, Saco, Old Orchard Beach Transit. Tony Scavuso is with us today as the general manager for that agency. They provide express service on I-95 on the Turnpike, and they also provide some local service on Route 1. However, the services aren't that frequent, and certainly part of that is due to funding limitations for those services and making those services more frequent, frankly. You can see, obviously, Scarborough is underserved from a transit perspective. And so we know the town's growing. We know that traffic's increasing. So what? Well, there's obviously challenges associated with growth. We know the town's growing, and rightfully so. That the town has great schools and amazing outdoor opportunities. It's got the best lobster roll in, I think, the state of Maine, and bite into Maine. My wife would agree with that assessment. And with this growth comes traffic. The roads will reach capacity, and as you all probably know, it's really expensive to expand existing roads, particularly roads like Route 1, where you'd have to acquire significant amounts of right-of-way. So with that, we want to explore, and we recommend municipalities that are in your position exploring other alternatives and other ways to manage traffic demand in the future. And transit is one big way to do that. And I'd say even if you could widen the roads, you'd still run into something called the induced demand that basically says, if you build it, they will come. If you add a lane, it's essentially a one-to-one relationship. So if you increase a roadway's capacity by 25%, you're going to attract 25% more vehicles to that facility, to that roadway in the future. And the other thing I'd say, growth, if it's done in kind of a piecemeal approach, if it's sprawling in nature, it could increase the strains on the system, increase municipal expenses. And we'll look at that in a minute, just the relationship between population density and municipal expenses and tax burden. But first, the downs. So circling back to the downs, it certainly provides a pretty amazing opportunity, I think, to not only does it serve as a prominent anchor in the region. You've got now the Downs at one end of Scarborough and Maine Med's campus on the other, and you've got the municipal complex in between, along with the Oak Hill shopping center. So there's a lot of opportunity to kind of connect the dots with this massive, incredible mixed-use anchor at one end. And it's the opportunity, obviously, to expand municipal tax base and attract new businesses and residents that are really interested in this like mixed-use community. And we've seen that in other parts of the country where certainly younger professionals, millennials, that's what they want. They want to live in a community, in a place that has a lot of different options and places to dine and grab a beverage and all sorts of things. So the Downs certainly provides that opportunity. Just based on my experiences elsewhere related to employers, prominent employers are also recognizing that in order to attract and retain a 21st century workforce, they need to adapt and are considering relocating in some cases to these kind of multimodal mixed use areas. And so that's another thing to consider. And that's what you're seeing, I think, with WEX and in that area. Lastly, I'd say, it's important, it provides an opportunity with so much density to actually generate more interest in transit and make transit a viable and competitive transportation option in the region, and certainly on the Route 1 corridor in Scarborough more broadly. And lastly, investments in transit, and particularly with a development of this size, helps leverage some other resources, whether it's federal resources that are administered through organizations like ours, like Christina mentioned, or other state resources, discretionary funding opportunities. So there's a lot that can go with kind of a more multimodal approach. This is just circling back to the relationship that I mentioned between population density and municipal costs. And you can see this is a chart from Halifax, Nova Scotia. And so you've got density. And as you increase density, in this case, up towards 100 people per acre, you can see that the estimated annual service costs go down. In other words, sprawling development patterns are expensive. It costs more money to pave a road and connect a sewer line to 5 families, each living a block apart on wooded lots, than to public infrastructure for those same 5 families living in a place like the Downs, a mixed-use center or a condo. As Christina mentioned, we're also embarking on a regional transit study. This is a joint funded study by the town, the Downs developer, as well as PAX, GPCOG. PAX is the Metropolitan Planning Organization, but housed within GPCOG as an organization. And we're still finalizing the scope of work, but the idea is to provide a holistic perspective at transit ridership potential. Not just at the site, but certainly in Scarborough and beyond, looking at regional connectivity and ridership under a couple different transit service planning scenarios. And our partners in this study, Metro and Biddeford-Saco Old Orchard Beach Transit, will work to provide those transit service plans so that we can all make more informed decisions and analyze a couple of those different scenarios that I mentioned. So this will hopefully be pretty interesting and informative moving forward. And lastly, wanted to touch on, so why transit? Why consider transit? Why invest in transit? Well, one reason is to improve mobility for your residents and employees, particularly essential workers, which I'll touch on next slide, and those visiting the region and the community. Young working families might be looking for housing near workplaces. Transit can help with that. Middle income households trying to stay in the region and afford housing in the region and save money on transportation costs, which are a pretty significant chunk of the average American's paycheck. Transit can help with that. And older adults who want to age in place, similar to the millennial population. A lot of older adults want to live in a place where they could live, work, and play, or not work, or retire. And even if traffic volumes remain constant after introducing transit, it'd still be a good thing. That would mean more people are traveling on the same roadways, more people are spending money in the local economy, more people have travel opportunities and economic opportunities, particularly important for traditionally disadvantaged populations, folks that don't have the luxury of owning a personal vehicle or having access to personal vehicles. Transit can also alleviate traffic congestion and reduce emissions on a corridor. That photo there on the right just shows you how much space 40 vehicles takes compared to one bus with 40 passengers, right? So it's a lot more roadway space. So there's opportunities at some point to even repurpose roadway space for other uses, to expand sidewalks and other things. And lastly, the timing's pretty good. The system is innovating in our region and modernizing, and I'll speak to that in a minute as well. In regards to who currently rides transit in our region and across the country, and there's certainly an unfair stigma in this country that only poor people ride buses, and that's not true. Yes, there's underprivileged communities and residents that depend on public transportation, but so do others, whether it's for affordability reasons or whether it's just a matter of choice. And certainly essential workers, that term and phrase has taken on a new meaning in the midst of this pandemic, and stress the need at all levels for public transportation to help these workers get to work. Folks like healthcare workers, whether it's clinical staff or non-clinical staff supporting the clinical operations of a hospital or healthcare facility. Maine Med employs roughly 1,000 people in Scarborough, mostly right along Route 1. And prior to joining GPCOG, I worked at Maine Med in transportation, trying to encourage employees to commute by alternative modes and make it easier to commute by alternative modes, primarily transit. And we rolled out a free bus program for all 18,000 Maine Health employees. One of the best moments of that was presenting to the largest department at Maine Medical Center, which was Environmental Services Department, so custodial staff, janitorial staff. They're the largest group and arguably the most transit dependent. Many of them depend on public transportation as a viable option because they don't own personal vehicles. And it was gratifying. We presented and literally got a round of applause, not for us, but for the program, because we were making their commutes that much more affordable and accessible. So it was a humbling moment. And I'd say the other thing, there's related to folks that have a choice and have access to personal transportation, they still may choose transit for any number of reasons. So we had a vice president at Maine Medical that rode the bus every day. We had a cardiologist that rode the bus every day. A lot of support staff and data analysts and scientists at MMCRI, the Maine Medical Research Center in Scarborough, just off of 100 Campus Drive. There's 300 employees there, and we had pretty high bus ridership, as well as active transportation use among that younger demographic. And lastly, folks that work at grocery stores like the Hannaford at Oak Hill, folks that are mobility impaired depend on transit and ride transit, and other essential workers like firefighters, policemen, and women. as I mentioned, the system's modernizing, so the timing's great. This isn't the transit system in our region, I think, of 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. There's new buses being added. Examples shown here from Metro on the left and Biddeford Saco Old Orchard Beach Transit on the right. These are significantly higher quality vehicles, lower emission vehicles that elevate the passenger experience. They're quieter and like I said, help reduce emissions compared to their predecessors. And GP Cog is also embarking on a transit study called Transit Together that will really take a holistic perspective of transit in the region and hopefully reimagine the network and look at better connections between routes and schedules, and make the transit system even more integrated in its fashion and easier for the user. The transit system is also electrifying its bus fleets. Biddeford Saco, Old Orchard Beach, and I think Metro have a few electric buses coming later this year. The agencies are also coming together. Metro, Biddeford Saco, Old Orchard Beach Transit, and South Portland, most notably, coming together to launch the Deer Go Touch Pass, which is a digital fare collection policy that enables folks to purchase passes electronically on their phone and then scan when they enter the bus, or purchase smart cards that are reloadable, that can be reloaded at destinations and retailers throughout the region. It really makes riding easier. It actually reduces the time at stops because folks aren't taking quite as long with cash. It actually makes it a more equitable system as well that Greg and Tony could certainly speak to. And last thing I would say as we look to the future, I'm going to wrap up just by touching on bus rapid transit and rapid transit generally. It's one of the core recommendations from our GPCOG's long-range transportation plan. Many municipalities have been partners on this, as well as the transit agencies. The plan's in its final stages, but one of the recommendations is to do a much deeper dive into rapid transit in the region. And this photo shows a rapid transit system that I rode in early 2019. It's in Eugene, Oregon. It's called the EMX. And looking at it, you'd almost think it was like a light rail service. It kind of looks and feels like light rail, but it's actually a giant articulated bus with the accordion door in the middle there. And like other rapid transit systems, it has unique branding. It has enhanced stations, opportunities to pay before getting on the bus, similar to Deer Go Touch Pass now. It runs more frequently, even though its stops are spaced out a little bit more. And it runs in some cases on dedicated bus lanes and really gives transit priority. And then by doing that, you're helping attract those choice riders that I mentioned, folks that have other options but want to take transit for one reason or another. And maybe it's because it's cheaper in some cases. And so with that, I thought we'd open it up to discussion and questions. And thanks again for having Christina and I today, and for having Greg and Tony who are with us as well. So I appreciate it. Thanks. I'll stop sharing.
Chris, thank you. I'm going to take a quick second and just bring Greg and Tony into the panelist here. So give me 1 second. And Jay, sure. That means we have 0 attendees. It's all panelists. So this is a big hit this evening. That's nice. All right, I think I have us all in here. So I'll start with a couple questions, if that's okay. Then I'll take some from the other counselors. So the Downs currently has some transit in it, correct? I've noticed, I've seen people get on the bus. Can we speak to what line that is and maybe some of the challenges the line is having or how successful it's been so far? Does anybody?
Sure, I can answer your questions. Again, I'm Tony Scavuzzo. I am the Executive Director of Biddeford Saco Old Orchard Beach Transit. We do have a relationship with the town of Scarborough as a partner. We do have service that serves the town of Scarborough and specifically the Downs. As we speak, our Portland Intercity Connector stops at the Downs in the Oak Hill area and 100 Campus Drive. We have about 30 stops a day in Scarborough, 15 northbound and 15 southbound. So we are there every hour in Scarborough from the 6 o'clock in the morning hour to the 9 o'clock in the evening hour. So we do stop at the Downs about 7 times a day. We also have seasonal trolley service, actually, that everybody is well aware of too. So we have quite a bit of service in the town of Scarborough, but there is service in the Downs presently, as well as a shelter that we just helped them install and purchase.
Is there any, I know there's not an overwhelming amount of residents in this town, but is in the Downs, excuse me, but is there any report out on the percent usage of the, are they being utilized with the current residents in there?
It is being utilized. Our ridership on that Portland Intercity Connected total is about 31,000 last fiscal year. That wasn't hit with a societal disruption. About 25% of those riders actually board and disembark in Scarborough, and specifically the Downs. It's between 5 and 10% of that ridership right now. So it has grown since we have started going in there in the last 12 to 15 months. And we're looking forward to more service and actually enhancing the service with Metro's partnership and some plans that we have to enhance the Route 1 corridor and the corridor of the main turnpike south of Portland between Bedford, Saco, and Portland.
And so right now, there's not many options to go south. Is that correct? If you're in Scarborough or in the Downs, are we going north primarily, I assume, or?
It's bi-directional over there, northbound about 15 times a day and southbound about 15. So there are options to come south.
I guess by south, I meant in the Saco Biddeford area. Do we have a line that's going from the Downs and looping to the Saco Biddeford area? We do on your
Yes.
system, correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Southbound is an option.
Any other, Jean Marie?
Yeah, I've got a couple questions. For those of you who may not know, I live on Route 114, which is overcrowded a good part of the time, particularly at the 114-22 intersection in North Scarborough. In 1988, I began meeting with PAX, John Duncan, with the promises, of course, of the bypass, which hopefully is getting closer with Main Turnpike. Now, granted, I know there is the concept of build it and they will come, but they're already here. And at certain times of the day, particularly in bad weather, traffic backs up in front of my house, which is a couple of miles probably from 22. It also, at different times of the day, backs up on Holmes Road, Broad Turn, in other words, the east-west. So I'm curious as to, other than, hopefully the turnpike maybe someday doing a bypass, is what are we doing about transit east-west? Because there are a number of people I know anecdotally because they stopped to buy honey at our house. And they're coming from Buxton, and they're coming from Hollis, and they're coming from Leamington, and they're using an east-west, and there's no transit other than you've got the Husky bus there that goes from USM, but goes through Westbrook rather than coming down through Scarborough. So what are we doing to help east-west? We got north-south, but how about east-west? Because that's, as a real estate broker too, I'll tell you that it's more affordable housing the further west you go. So that's where you're going to see some push. I know you're seeing it in Gorham in particular, which you guys are aware of, with housing. And, how can we get them on board with transit also? That's my question. How's that?
Do any of you guys want to take that?
I'm looking at Greg and he's looking at me. So
I'll jump in.
Why don't I briefly, I think this is Greg's, good for Greg, but for east-west in the Bedford Saco area, and this could end up being pertinent for Scarborough, we have folks from south of the Bedford Saco area and west of the turnpike coming to the park and rides at exit 32 and exit 36 to use the Zoom Express. And we have for over 20 years. So about 50% of the users of the Zoom Express come from those areas. So one option would be servicing the park and ride or a park and ride or the Downs in the Scarborough area, so the cars wouldn't have to come all the way into town, and they could use that service in a similar way.
Well, but they'll still be clogging up north and western Scarborough, so that's not a big help. But thank you. I mean, it's an idea.
Yep, no, I duly noted. I wanted to just make sure that was said, but I think this is a good question for Greg.
Yeah, so on the east-west question, Gorham and those points to the west and north of Gorham, and it's really those residents and those automobiles that are sort of flooding those streets, 114 and 22, coming into Scarborough and South Portland. And I don't have the data on this, but I believe that most of those automobiles are going into Portland, areas of South Portland. And yes, the Husky Line is you saw the slide Chris put up earlier that showed an example of a BRT or a bus rapid transit service. We hope that the Husky Line is sort of right now it's the lowest level of BRT that you can possibly have, meaning it's a different brand and it's limited stop service. And so to a degree, it is faster than your regular local bus service that's stopping every quarter mile or so to pick people up. It's designed to be higher speed. It only stops on the USM campus in Gorham. It stops in the Gorham Village. It stops twice now in Westbrook, not 3 or 4 or 5 times. And it stops 3 or 4 times in Portland. So getting people to their destinations quicker. Now our goal is to, again, referring back to the slide Chris showed, begin to evolve the Husky Line to more of a full-fledged BRT system. Again, that allows it to operate faster to get people from Gorham. And ultimately, we want to work with MTA, with the town of Gorham, with other partners and MainDOT to build park and rides to the west and to the west or to the north of the Gorham Village, because we want to capture those cars in park and rides before they hit the Gorham Village, because the Gorham Village is having the same problem that you're having in Scarborough. And so if we can do that, then I'm confident that with a fast and highly visible and highly effective BRT system with good park and ride capacity to the west and north of Gorham, we can capture a lot of those cars and make those trips quick and convenient and comfortable getting into Westbrook and Portland, and stop them from driving down 114 and going past your house to get into Portland.
I mean, and that's great. And how's the ridership been on the Husky Line, especially since USM's been impacted by the pandemic? And has that made a difference or not? I know it's fairly new, so you may not know what a real, so to speak, impact is, but.
We had a really good first year, both from USM generated ridership and also from ridership coming from the town of Gorham, from Westbrook, from Portland. And we were very happy with year 1 performance. And then as we got into the middle of year 2, the pandemic, hit. So it is difficult for us to assess, how we're doing. We've now got to extend our pilot project out a year or 2 to give it a chance to bounce back. A typical maturity rate with any new service in transit is really a minimum of 3 years before you can really assess how it's doing.
And then just very quickly, there are a number of elderly people who live out in North Scarborough. I have a lot of elderly, I mean, I'm getting older, but they're older than I am, and they have transportation issues. And there's nothing serving them. So I know, we're talking about this and that, but I just wanted to add in that we want to make sure that we're serving the older folks who do live out here in western northern Scarborough, and not forgetting that they need to be able to get places too. Also, anyway, that's it. That's my soapbox for today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jean Marie, I just wanted to respond to that last piece about some of older adults. And, it doesn't make economic sense to run a huge bus out to serve a few people. However, it does make sense for us to use technology to be able to run smaller vehicles that are more door to door for people that have disabilities or have other kinds of health issues. And so we at GPCOG have somebody that's looking at that regionally and actually is staffing a statewide network on this, because what you'll see is that there are a lot of different social service providers that are providing transportation. They all come from different federal funding sources. They have different restrictions on them. And it makes it very difficult to efficiently use, in my opinion, taxpayer dollars to deliver high quality door-to-door service for people who need it. So this is it seems like it might be a simple thing to do, but it's actually kind of a big nest of issues that need to be dealt with. And we think it's a high priority because Maine is the oldest nation in the country, as everybody here knows, and that population mobility needs are expanding. So I don't have an easy answer for you on that. Just know that there are a lot of people, a lot of smart people that are thinking about it.
Thanks, awesome. That's great to know, because I agree with you. It's a mess right now, the so-called individual transportation options for folks. So
Yeah.
thank you.
And part of the reason I just want to underscore one of the things that Chris said, part of the reason that we're really delighted to be talking to the Scarborough Council tonight is that the Scarborough Downs is like one of the best opportunities for allowing growth to happen in the region, because there are growth pressures and it's going to go somewhere. And it could pop out in Buxton and then increase the traffic that you're seeing, Jean Marie.
Right.
Or it can be more consolidated in places like the Downs, Rock Row, Portland Peninsula, South Portland Mall. When that happens, it makes it a lot more efficient from a taxpayer perspective to introduce or expand public transportation. And so, what we're talking to you tonight about is the possibility of having more robust public transportation service, building on the good foundation that Tony's service has laid in order to make sure that you've got as few cars using your crowded Route 1 as possible.
Thank you. Councilor John Clucci.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. This was great. I had a question. You partially answered it, but I'll ask it anyways. It sounds like we've got some options for getting out of town right now, either going north or south. But as you work through your study, and I don't know if you've scoped it yet or not, but I'd be interested in seeing how can we improve our mobility within Scarborough from one point to another, similar to what Jean Marie was saying. But and I think that technology might be one answer. Better mobility or accessibility for bikes and trails and whatnot might be another. But then there might be a smaller scale bus service that might make sense in some areas. Somebody from the Downs or Oak Hill wants to go to the beach. Are there other options that we can kind of think through as we continue to develop and build out?
I can speak to that briefly.
Okay, Chris, thank you.
In saying that the smaller study that was mentioned, the $25,000 study, may capture some of that, but it's really about transit modeling and forecasting under a few different scenarios. It is still being scoped. It's in the kind of final stages, and subject to Maine DOT review and approval, as well as the town. But I'd say maybe the bigger opportunity would be that other study I mentioned called Transit Together, where we're looking at the region almost as a blank canvas to provide those types of connections. And embedded in that study, we'll look at microtransit as well, which is what Christina was speaking to, about using smaller, more nimble services and vehicles to serve maybe those areas that aren't as developed as, say, a Downs or Portland or Biddeford Saco, but yeah, maybe some of the beach communities, near Pine Point, as an example, in Scarborough. So that could certainly be part of that study. So we appreciate your comment and suggestion.
Thank you. Councilor Gleisteen. Councilor Gleisteen, you're on mute if you're trying to speak.
Sorry, guys, I apologize for that. And I apologize for not having the camera tonight. Chris, you were talking about how getting healthcare workers in the pandemic, how transit is good for that. I guess that's a little confusing to me, because I think, when all is said and done with the pandemic and we look back at the areas that were hard hit, the governors in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, definitely felt that public transit was a problem in terms of COVID spread, and just air quality in general is something that as a society we've not really tackled. And I think, one of the really interesting things that happened in COVID was that the the airlines actually tripled their airflow and put more scrubbers in and scrub the airs. And, there was an MIT study that said being on a plane is probably one of the safest places you can be. And so, viruses are going to come and go. Respiratory things are going to come and go. So, is there any kind of discussion whatsoever about learning from this in terms of, cleanliness and airflow and air circulation, which I know probably would add great costs, but if we don't go down that route, it just seems like the next time this happens, which viruses always happen, it's going to, you already mentioned it, hit your husky line. You don't have riders. So I was just wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I can speak broadly, and then I think Greg or Tony can probably speak a little bit more articulately about the cleaning and sanitation and ventilation on buses in particular, which is actually pretty good, partly because of bus doors opening and providing additional airflow, particularly in warmer months, obviously in the summer with windows open too, that helps a lot. But broadly about public transit being an issue during this particular pandemic, I think there's been a couple studies actually around the world that have shown that I should say have not shown any kind of discernible impact or relationship between public transit and COVID spread. I can understand why there are concerns, but I don't think the data and the studies have shown that. And secondly, one of the reasons the federal government has put money to public transit during this pandemic is to keep transit agencies afloat, but to ensure that a lot of these essential workers still get to work, folks that don't have access to any other public transport or any other transportation options. And it's so critical for the healthcare system, really, but even more broadly, the economy. The economy would be in worse shape than it is if those essential workers didn't get to places like supermarkets and hospitals, certainly.
Okay, so I get what you're saying. The people that were already using public transit, they were essential to get to work, and so the transit was key for that. Okay, thanks.
Betsy, I'll just add one other quick thing, which is interesting about transit is people don't tend to talk on transit, and they tend to do shorter rides, and then you do have the doors opening. So it's actually not, that's why the studies I think have shown that there hasn't been much spread, is that it's a little bit different than like sitting indoors with people with their masks off in terms of the spread. The other thing I'll say is that when the pandemic hit, one of the first things that transit agencies wanted us to invest in was looking at best operating procedures. And so we've created kind of a best practices guide for the transit agencies regionally on what they need to do for sanitation and ventilation and for PPE and how to protect drivers, how to protect riders. And I think it might be useful. This is probably an issue that's of interest to the public, even though, Paul, it doesn't look like we have many people here, but maybe Greg and Tony want to talk a little bit about the very extensive measures that you've taken to keep passengers as safe as possible.
There's hundreds of people on YouTube right now as we speak. So, Greg or Tony, did you want to expand on those answers to Betsy? Greg, I think your hand was up, or?
Sure, yeah. So, Chris and Christina kind of went over some of the highlights really well. Obviously, since this thing began, some of the guidance from CDC and some of the information about what was the best thing to do evolved, over the first couple of months. But where we are today is obviously we're doing a lot of cleaning of our surfaces on board the buses and in our facilities. We have a new fare collection system that is more contactless than our old system was. So that was somewhat serendipitous during this pandemic. But when the pandemic first hit, we went to rear door boarding only so that we were protecting our bus operators from our passengers and vice versa. We installed bus operator partitions. So just like what you see in a supermarket or a convenience store, there's a plexiglass partition, giving the driver some added degree of protection. There's a mask requirement for all riders and bus operators to wear masks. And as those are, I think, are the highlights around onboard sort of passenger-based mitigations. But as Chris alluded to and Christina alluded to as well, the onboard environment of a bus trip is relatively short. Our average trip on transit is no more than 2 or 3 miles on average. And so with those doors opening and closing, the research has shown that air quality, while maybe not perfect, is perhaps better than a subway car where you're on there for maybe a bit longer and you're much more packed in usually. One of the things that we are going to be experimenting with in the first quarter of 2021 is a UV light air purification system that will be installed on 2 of our new buses coming in March of 2021. And if that proves to be effective in circulating the air through an enclosed component, cleaning it, zapping it as the case may be, and spitting it back out through a motorized fan, we're going to evaluate whether or not that's proven to be effective or not. The science around that has been shown to be effective. Whether or not it works well in a bus environment, we'll see about that. But if it is, that would be a bit of a game changer in terms of really being confident that the air quality on board buses is really, really great. Tony, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I think you and Chris and Christina have nailed this. The one thing that I think we haven't mentioned is the use of electrostatic disinfecting technology, which I had in my agency before the pandemic hit. I think most did, but that basically fogs the bus, and the electrostatic nature of it ionizes the cleaning particles, so it sticks to not only all touch surfaces, but all surfaces. So in a matter of 3 to 5 minutes, we can fog an entire bus with electrostatic disinfecting technology, basically cleaning it. We were doing this on a weekly basis. The buses were very clean anyway, and they are in public transit anyway because of staff all over the country doing this. We started doing that every day, doing that every single day, still are, to prepare our vehicles for service on a daily basis. So that with every single thing, that also hand sanitizer on board, bus partitions, UV technology coming, we're doing this on a daily basis. So our vehicles are definitely seen, there's no doubt about it.
Thanks, Tony.
So-
Council guys, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, just really quick on that. So yeah, that's great. That's really, and just really good information. And yeah, some of the things I had read really were more related to trains and subways. So it's definitely good to hear, it makes a lot of sense why there would be a difference with a bus. And that would be what we would be talking about in the greater Portland region. And then this UV light and that ionization, that's great. I hope more people are able to start utilizing technologies like that for indoor air quality. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Anderson and then Councilor Hamel.
Hey, everybody. Great presentation. Thank you, Chris. So my question is kind of what's being done today, if anything, with some of the major employers in the region to see if there's some sort of opportunity between towns and employers to try and create some sort of incentive program to drive public transit for commuters? Because, I think we talked a lot about some of the traffic issues that we experience in Scarborough, and a lot of it is people trying to get to work, or especially like Jean Marie mentioned, when the weather's bad and people are going places, things get backed up. And I'm just wondering, are we exploring that at all within the greater Portland area to see how maybe partnering with the private sector and the companies can help to address some of our transit challenges?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can tackle this one, I think. So it's definitely not a one size fits all approach, and it's been kind of piecemeal. So certain employers in the region have stepped up for varying reasons, I would say, in implementing what's called transportation demand management, which is exactly what you're talking about, like a holistic perspective that includes transit, but carpooling, incentives, teleworking, perhaps, active transportation, walking, cycling to work, all kind of suite of choices, which are usually driven by increased parking prices, which help drive that change, or incentives on the other side of things, as you mentioned, to help entice folks to commute by these alternative modes of transportation. And so, Maine Medical Center has done it. You tend to see it more in Portland because Portland actually has a zoning ordinance, or an ordinance that requires developments of a certain size, requires those employers in this case to have a TDM program, a transportation demand management program, and actually outline implementable steps and strategies to help tackle what you're getting at. So Portland, you see it more. WEX on the peninsula does this, but I don't know if they have plans to do it in Scarborough. So in a lot of cases, it's driven by the town and local requirements and municipal ordinances to help foster that change needed. Because not all employers will necessarily take the initiative on their own because it's an added expense. They may not be well educated about it. And from GPCOG's perspective, that is one of the things that's on our list to do is to explore more of a region-wide approach to this, to get more employers on board and perhaps develop an organization that helps leverage some of the employer contributions in certain cases to help invest in park and ride, shuttle services, other incentives. So we'll hopefully get there as a region. In the meantime, it's sort of on the employers and the municipalities, but we hope to have a more regional perspective, and maybe the Maine DOT will do the same. They're doing a little bit already.
Thank you. And I just want to say, you did some really good analysis at the beginning, and I went into our draft comp plan just to kind of compare the two. And I think, Jay, our transportation section is really good. And I think a lot of the stuff they touched on, you've captured. So kudos to you for telling that story in our comp plan. I do think, though, there's maybe a little bit more we can do to expand on the public transit component, that maybe you guys could take a look at our draft comp plan and provide some input on some key strategies that maybe we don't have in there today that could just expand it a little bit more than what we have. So that's just something to consider as we move the comp plan forward.
Yeah, we'd be happy to do that.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but just to tie off from that with Jonathan, as a lifelong Mainers have a real, they don't like public transit. They don't want to take it. They think it's inconvenient. They don't understand it. My daughter lives in Chicago and has lived there for 8 years, or more actually. Now they think about it, and she doesn't own a car, and she can't imagine owning a car. So education of people and why it makes sense to take public transit is going to be huge. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Thank you. Councilor Anderson, are you all done? Okay, yep. Councilor Hamel?
And I just want to thank you. Thank everyone who's joining us this evening. It's very helpful getting a grasp on the challenges that we face. It's clearly a multifaceted problem, a lot of complexity, a lot of issues, a lot of players. So I'm just kind of curious, if you had to step back for a minute, what's the number one obstacle to our making progress, with transportation, with mitigating traffic and improving efficiency? I know as Americans, we have a tendency to look for a big solution, a cure for cancer, a moonshot, what's the equivalent? I always thought it was going to be something like riderless vehicles. We'll put in 5G and all of a sudden people won't be driving, one person to a car. But what's the number one obstacle or opportunity that you see? And what's the number one thing that you would suggest we could do as a council and as a town, as a public in Scarborough?
Well, I'll start by reiterating what you said, Don, which is it's really complicated. It's hard to boil it down to one thing. But I would say that we have a vision in this region of making public transportation competitive with the car. And by that, we mean going as fast and being as easily accessible. It's already cheaper. It's way cheaper than owning a car. So it's got affordability on its side. But if we could make it faster and more convenient, and from the town's perspective, that likely requires some investment because we need local match for federal dollars for transit. And it also requires you not just offering ubiquitous free parking, because when you have free parking, it makes it really difficult for people to be incentivized to take transit. So the places where transit really works, like Chicago, like where Jean Marie's daughter lives, you know, it's there's density, you know, so there are a lot of people living and working in the same place, what you've got going on in Scarborough, but you also have dedicated rights of way for transit, so they go faster than cars. And lastly, you have kind of you don't have much parking that's inexpensive. So you know, there are many other elements here, and I think Greg, Chris, and Tony may want to pipe in on this, but that would be my answer to your question, Don.
Great, thanks.
That was perfect.
And there's more people, just, you nailed it, but there's more people moving to Maine, more young people with an urban mindset that don't want to, you don't have to live in Chicago, San Francisco, or New York to have that urban mindset and say, I don't want to own a car. And more density is being created. In Biddeford and Saco, we have a totally different housing footprint in these mills. Young people are moving there and they don't want to own a car. So we want to cater our options for them to make sure that they're served properly. And Christina just pretty much nailed it.
Thank you. Great points. Thank you.
Yeah, just to quickly add to that, just from my observations of I own a business in Biddeford, and one of the common things now is you live in Biddeford and you take public transportation to Portland if that's where you're working, you know, and so it's a great example of there are many people. Biddeford, I believe, is it the youngest town right now in the state? Is that right? So it's pretty interesting that just 3 miles down the street, the oldest town in the state has the youngest town in the state. Councilor Anderson, did you have another question?
Yeah, I just had one other question that you guys just made me think of as we were talking about other things and how things are changing. I didn't attend the coffee talk for the climate action plan, but I'm just curious, like within there, how much are they talking about transportation as a key strategy for the future to support climate? Because again, I think that might be, to Jean Marie's point, a new lens that we could bring to Mainers, knowing that that's important to Mainers to make sure that we factor in climate change and transportation and how that can be part of the solution.
Don, that's an awesome question. And the climate action plan basically has a two-pronged strategy on transportation. Probably as everybody knows now, 54% of Maine's greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation. So it's far, far bigger than any other sector of the economy that's producing greenhouse gases. So the two-pronged strategy for transportation is to electrify as many passenger vehicles as possible, and to reduce the amount of driving that happens. And to reduce the amount of driving that happens, transit is an important component. Developments like the Downs are an important component. And so those, and walking and biking, actually, and during the pandemic, walking and biking is skyrocketing. You know, so, you know, a place like Scarborough Downs, when you could kind of roll out of bed, get a coffee, hit the community center, and go to your job, right? That's the ultimate transportation project, right? Because you don't have to get on anything. You can just be there, and you've met all your needs, right? So so in the plan, it recognizes that electrifying the fleet of private vehicles is extremely expensive, and it lays out some pretty ambitious goals. But right now, only 0.5% of our vehicles in Maine are electric. So we have a long way to go to really electrify. And they did some very good modeling that shows that you can't electrify fast enough to meet the greenhouse gas goals that have been set by the legislature. So there needs to be a focus on public transportation. And one of the specific recommendations in there is that the state of Maine increase its investment in public transportation. Right now, Maine invests about 86 cents per person. Vermont, by contrast, is $14 per person. So the recommendation in the action plan is to increase it to $5 per capita, which would allow for a lot more state money to act as local match to federal dollars. One of the big challenges we have for transit is that we don't have enough local match, and that's why we have to rely on municipalities to help fund public transportation at a higher rate than I think other places in the country. Chris, Greg, Tony, you want to add anything to that? Don't want to monopolize.
Thank
I wanted
you.
to make a point if I could. You know, it's certainly appropriate having GP Cog here, and I want to underscore a comment that Christina had at the outset of this, is that Greater Portland, this region is growing, whether we like it or not, and we are all capable of having a parochial view. We know what we see here in our community, but it's happening all around us. And so we'll be having some detailed discussions around what can we do to manage the pace of growth and the direction of growth. And I think we've got some good strategies, to direct that. But again, the point is it's happening all around us. And my information is a bit dated, but I suspect it's even a greater percentage now. We did some significant intersection improvements down in the Dunston area of town. And as part of that analysis and traffic studies, it was documented that over 30% of traffic on Route 1 begins outside of town and is going somewhere outside of town. And so where the Downs is located, the Crossroads District is certainly aptly named. Scarborough is a crossroads. Folks are coming through our community to work and recreate and everything in between. And so in spite of all of our best efforts and intentions to control growth within us, we don't have a wall around us. And so we are affected by what happens around us equally.
So I think this might be a question for Tony, and I guess as bluntly as possible, what the heck's with all those lines? How come we don't have one of them? Why, if you look at the map, right, we have, is it like 6 or 7 different bus routes right now? Is there efforts to consolidate those, or are the owner structure of those lines preventative from being more efficient, or how does that work?
Well, I know.
Or is the current way the appropriate way to do it? Or is there, I mean, objectively speaking, is it clearly, does it need to be more efficient, or?
I think there's opportunities for improvement to be more efficient. And I think I've been in this position about 18 months and I've seen definite progress toward doing things like merging schedules and other efforts to make it more efficient. I know, like I said, consolidation, that's what it's been called, has been talked about, but I think we're really talking more, how can we make the entire system more efficient? All modes, not just buses, but Amtrak and also the ferries. The new payment system is another way we're making things more efficient. But I know this has been an issue and it's a bit of a hot topic, but I think working together, we can make these gains in efficiency together and hopefully soon.
If it's okay for me to jump in real quick too and answer to that question, and Tony just did a great job. I just want to reinforce, yeah, we are working to partner, because the real end game is, regardless of the administrative side of things and sort of who's operating what, ultimately we want the rider's experience to be as simple and easy and seamless as possible. We want them interfacing ideally with, sort of one entity if possible. It doesn't mean there can't be multiple agencies doing different things behind the scenes, but Tony referenced the partnership on the electronic fare program that we just launched, which we call the Derigo Touch Pass system. So now today, a comparison to a few months ago, you can use the Derigo Touch Pass to use Metro, to use Tony's service, to use the City of South Portland bus service. And we hope to expand that to include Casco Bay lines in the future, Amtrak Down Easter, and a few others. Tony and I are also working on a partnership that would, in the end, improve service to the town of Scarborough on Route 1, in connection with making improvements on the Turnpike Express routes as well. So there are ways that we are working to make that service as seamless to the customer, and that's what matters really in the end.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's forward facing to the customer. If it's all the same, so to speak, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
So Paul, I know you have another item on your agenda. So I just wanted to let you guys know that if you'd like to have us back to present the study results for the transit study, we'd be happy to come back. And I also want to just reiterate that we hope to see you all next week at the welcome and congrats reception.
You are really good at ending the agenda item. I like that. The answer is yes. We do have another agenda item, so we will wrap it up. Thank you for the offer. I can tell you right now, everybody's shaking their head yes, so we do want you back once the study is complete. So thank you all for your time. I think this was incredibly helpful, and I think it's a great conversation starter for us. I think it's just what we needed to just gain some perspective on where we are currently and where we hope to go. So As always, Christina, you're the best. Thank you. And Chris, Greg, and Tony, we appreciate your time, and we'll see you guys back once the study is complete.
Thank
It
you,
was
everybody.
so nice to be invited. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nice work.
So with that, I am not going to pause the Zoom, but we're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll reconvene at 6:50. Please just turn your mics off and your cameras off while we take a break. Because if I pause the Zoom, then YouTube will get a little messed up. So we will see everybody in 5 minutes.
You've got your hand raised, Mr. Hamel.
Thank you. I'll put my hand down.
Put your hand down, please.
Thanks. Keep forgetting to do that.
All right, we're here. Let's go. Let's
Yeah.
get
Let's wrap
places
this
to go.
up.
Places to go.
Since we just doubled the cost of the building, let's wrap it up.
Just need to appoint a sergeant at arms.
I'll tell you, for probably 10, 20 grand, we could put it, just a gate at the 295 spur. Traffic problems are solved.
Well, I was going to say, make them all toll roads. That takes care of traffic. That redirects traffic real fast.
$5 a gallon gas will take care of it too.
With an arrow toward the Echo Main landfill that it has to go over. Last time they designed it. This is live, by the way.
Yes.
Okay.
It's okay. I was serious.
Yeah, it's tough, just no simple answers on this one. It's just.
I don't know, Don, you came up with a lot of them. We had flying cars, we had.
And I didn't even get to the O, by the way.
Yeah, I was looking for the teleporter next. Where's the teleporter?
There you go.
All right, well, we're back from recess. Item number 2 on the agenda is a discussion of, this has been mentioned publicly before, but just to bring the public up to speed if they're watching, is essentially there's an opportunity to buy the Masonic Hall, the town to purchase the Masonic Hall that is adjacent to the Dunstan Fire Station here in Scarborough. And the town manager has mentioned it a couple times, but he has negotiated a price for, I believe, $379,000, which would purchase the building. That decision rests on the council alone, whether we want to execute that or not. And it looks like the early temperature of the project is positive. However, we haven't had the opportunity to just publicly have a free flowing discussion about it. So before it is on our agenda, which I believe it's on our agenda next week, I just thought it would be appropriate for us to discuss. Furthermore, the finance committee on Monday at 5:15, Tuesday at 4 o'clock, the finance committee will do a little bit of a deeper dive into the finances of the project. And I assume they will vote and give us a recommendation on purchase of it. Mr. Galucci's nodding his head, kind of, so.
We hope so.
Yep, we'll take that as, yeah, approve or just do want to not approve. So with that being said, Mr. Hall did get some short and long-term repair estimates today. I believe they came in at like 2 o'clock this afternoon. He has emailed them, but I figured let's just start with the new information, so we're all on the same playing field. And then I have no sub agenda here. I think we'll just do some talking amongst ourselves and call it good. So with that, Tom, you want to just tell us what has transpired today?
Yeah, and just let me give you 2 minutes what led us to this evening. About 3 weeks ago, I became aware of this, the fact that this property was going on the open market. So we didn't have any exclusive, rights to this, so to speak, or inside track. But I do know that the sellers are interested in kind of the stewardship of this property going forward, which is certainly helpful. So in an effort to really just buy an option, keep an option alive for this discussion to happen and the council to give it a full consideration, I did negotiate a purchase and sale agreement. I didn't want to be cute, so it's at the full asking price. I did get consultation from a broker that asking price appears to be fair in the marketplace. So I don't think it's obscene in that regard. It is totally contingent on council approval, and we have until December 18th, you do, to choose to exercise that or not. If you do, there's a due diligence period that will extend beyond that. I did try and do have some information I'd like to share with you tonight to have a property inspection done, and including a fairly thorough evaluation from a professional engineer and architect to help us understand the sorts of challenges we might be facing taking occupancy of such a property. So I did share it late this afternoon. I apologize for the lateness of it, but again, I really worked hard to get things done in this time frame. The upshot is that the building is in fairly good shape. The foundation has a couple of cracks that can be fairly simply and cheaply addressed through epoxy. Nothing really extraordinary there. Electrical has been upgraded. There's again, a number of things that probably need some attention, but not costly, not of any concern at this point. The roof and generally the exterior is showing its age, and there have been years of neglect, might be too strong a word, probably deferred maintenance is a better way to characterize it, such that the roof really needs to be repaired. There's three sections of the roof that have missing asphalt shingles. 2 of them are showing signs of rot in the sheathing, and from our interior inspection, we see no visible water damage on the interior, but having said that, it certainly needs attention sooner than later to make it watertight. The other issue on the interior would be handicap ADA compliance. That's both in bathroom areas and just accessing the 2 floors. The entry point, the ground level entry point, to get to either floor, you need to either go up 6 stairs or down 6 stairs, and there's no handicap accessibility at this point. So it does require some expense in configuration. You'll see what Paul has up on the screen here is kind of an initial estimate that tries to put some details around the different improvements. You'll notice the foundation crack repairs. He's valued in the $5,000 range. There's a couple of options for the handicap accessibility. We can talk about that further, but suffice to say that's in the $50,000 to $70,000 range, depending on which choice you take. Bathroom renovations is, little between 20 and 25,000. He has the roof at 20. That might be a little rich, but for conversations purposes. And then there's some design, and he's suggesting some contingency. So our range is probably 125 to 175. Again, these are kind of rough numbers, depending on which options you choose. I would say that there are certainly options for us to secure the building, make it weather tight, and then wait on making renovations. Depending on how we choose to use it and how quickly we want to use it, will really depend on when we need to make those other improvements. I would note, and we'll get into this in more detail at finance, though I think we are very comfortable in using land bond funds for the acquisition of the property. And perhaps some of the exterior improvements, so long as they go to the historic preservation aspects. The majority of these renovation expenses would be something that we would go through our annual budget process and be something through our capital improvement program. I do not see how land bond funds could be used for renovation purposes. So there's some delay in that regard at any rate. Beyond that, there's some other recommendations, future renovations. I have talked to our commercial code officer. There's no sprinkler system requirement. We may choose to do that. That's about a $40,000 investment. Ventilation upgrades, I think that's more COVID related, given the front of mind issues with air circulation. Again, there's no requirement to do so. The furnace is, it appears to be the original from the mid 80s. So undoubtedly that will have to get replaced, but it is functional right now. It's not been serviced in a couple of years, but it's keeping the building warm. And fire alarm system update as well is something we consider. Again, those are all choices, nothing mandated. So I present this to you really to make sure that we have a full appreciation for what we're getting into, so to speak. I did supply a number of documents for your consideration, kind of background, historical documents. And again, I think we'll go into some of the finer financial details and funding sources at Finance Committee. I'm pleased to talk about them tonight as well, if you like. But I guess I want to end and then we can take questions. From my perspective, kind of there's a number of different reasons that I think the town should consider this. Not the least of which we have significant interest right next door, and there's shared travel ways and parking areas. I guess to put it bluntly, a bad neighbor could be a real problem for us here. And so first and foremost, protecting our existing interest at the Dunstan Fire Station. Secondly, this building is on and has been designated by this council as a historic property in town, so it already has that status and stature. And I think it does run the risk going to a private party to be significantly changed forever. And so this is an opportunity that may not present itself again. And lastly, I think there are a number of community uses that can reasonably be considered. There are 2 open spaces with I won't call it a commercial kitchen, but it's an area that could be used to warm, and serve meals out of. There's any number of community services programs that I think could very easily work there. As has been suggested by some members of the community, there's also the potential of finding private parties and actually rent, people paying rent potentially. So I don't come to you with that being the driving force, though I think there's a number of opportunities that we need to explore and fully explore before we make any investment, certainly. But job one is whether or not we want to secure the property in our ownership, and then we can sort through the myriad of other choices at a later date. So with that, I'm pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. Before we talk amongst ourselves, any questions for Tom? Councilor Caterina, then Councilor Johnson.
Yeah, Tom, our broker is John Harmon, correct?
Correct.
Have you discussed with him the possibility of renegotiating price based on the outcome of the inspections? And I don't want to get into numbers here because to me that's a private thing that you shouldn't be doing in public, but because it's
Yes,
contract negotiation.
Yes, in concept, he's, in fairness, he's not been privy to these
Okay.
reports. They came in too late this afternoon, but in concept, yes.
Okay, all right. Because I would encourage, let's keep that on the table, and I have some thoughts on that, but not to discuss here.
Thank you. Councilor Johnson?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm gonna probably have to on to the next meeting. I have a couple questions. I'm assuming that the who would manage the property? This be a community services management area, or I'm sure even if it's not being used, it may sit vacant, but it will need to be, taken care of. So where does that come from, Tom?
My sense would be community services would be the logical one. We do have the luxury of 24-hour personnel at the fire station. So having that sort of oversight, I won't say management, but having oversight next door, I think gives me a level of comfort. But this would fit most cleanly into what community services does already.
Yep. And because it's already designated a historical site, it would always remain a historical site. Is that correct if we own it? Meaning it could not be utilized for, let's say, an expansion of the Dunstan Fire Station.
Yeah, I mean, if we own it, we choose to do what we will with it. There, though we have a historic preservation component of our zoning ordinance, it's fairly toothless, I'll say. It's more incentive-based in terms of private entities being aware that their property is historic, and there's some accommodation for them to renovate to keep that historic nature, but there's no requirement per se. In terms of use of a fire station, I don't ever envision that being the need. Having said that, the property and the common areas of travelway, I think certainly do come into play. They do today, and they certainly would if we look at any kind of expansion of that current station.
Right.
But I wouldn't expect this building ever to be used for that purpose. No.
And we could codify that in some manner on paper that after 10, 20 years from now, or whatever, that would still remain a building as a community service type building and not become an expansion of the Dunstan Fire Station, which I know is on the long range plan, the long range plan. That's why I'm bringing it up. And I don't feel comfortable with it unless it's in writing.
Yeah, I'm not sure how a current council can bind a future council, but I think there's ways to make the sentiment of this council absolutely clear. There may be ways to impose restrictions on the deed on yourself.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, the deed might be the way. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Caterina?
Yeah, I was just going to add that, Tom. You can put restrictions in the deed, or you could do some sort of for the next 15 years, this property cannot be used for anything other than, but keep it broad. But yeah, you can do that through the deed. I'm not a lawyer, but that would be what I would tell you. And I would agree. I mean, if we're going to pay for this with historic bonds, I would hate to, 5 years down the line say, oh, now we're going to tear it down because we want to expand the fire station. I wouldn't want to see that either, just so people would know that.
Good questions. Good. Any more for Tom before Councilor Clucci?
Yeah, I agree with the sentiment, Councilor Johnson, that we're trying to protect the structure, and I think that's why it makes a lot of sense. We're also trying to protect our access to the firehouse. In terms of how you can legally bind a future council, I don't know. If you can deed restrict it, then you can probably deed unrestrict it at a future date. So I don't know if there's an airtight way of doing it, but somebody smarter than me can probably try to figure it out. One thing that I'm going to be curious about for the finance committee meeting is, we have to move fast with this, right? And I'm okay with that. But are there other funding sources that we could get access to if we structured the deal a certain way versus another way? And I'm thinking more, a lot of the big reason that we have the land bond is so that these other organizations can go out and get grant or matching funds. We haven't had the opportunity to run this through that process. And I don't know enough about that process to know if it's even an option or a possibility if we qualify. But I would like to understand it a little better. So I don't know if there's resources that we can possibly tap that can.
Yeah, I can give it further thought. I'm not immediately aware that there's any ready source. There may be some philanthropies that I'm not familiar with that maybe have available funds to leverage the purchase.
Okay.
But I'm not aware of any state, public funds, so to speak. Most of those are in the area of land conservation through the Maine for Land Futures program and the Coastal Waters program. But again, I'll do some research to see if I can find something between now and next Tuesday.
Okay. Councilor Gleisting?
Yep, thank you. So one person who mentioned there's very limited parking there. That's my first question. Can you speak to that, Tom?
Yes, it appears as though there's about 8 spaces that are dedicated and uniquely owned and on this parcel. Interestingly, the parcel does extend to and includes kind of the travel way to all the spaces on the side of the fire station as well. And so that was really what I was referring to, that a bad neighbor could cause us some challenges in that regard. Worth noting that the Scarborough Historical Society owns the building to the rear, and they are similarly challenged and dependent on this parcel to come and go from their property. They aren't us, but they are kissing cousins, so to speak. We certainly have some level of relations with them, and I think there's a public purpose served there as well. So 8 spaces that are dedicated for this. The value of it being in common town ownership is that we have the potential of using spaces at the fire station, depending on the function you're holding and the demands. And I suspect we could work cooperatively with the Historical Society for the same purposes. And we'd reciprocate, obviously, if they have a need.
And so, so is this something that, has been, I mean, you've been town manager for 10 years now. Is this something that you've wanted and expressed interest in and have thought about, or it just happened to come up and someone just happened to call you and you said, wait, that would be a good idea? Or is this something that was a part of a vision for a long time?
No, this is totally opportunistic. I guess might be embarrassed to admit that I did not have the foresight. I didn't appreciate frankly, the historical value of this building. It's fairly nondescript from the outside.
Yeah.
I was very interested to hear of its storied history, being relocated from the corner where the monument now stands and serving as a Grange Hall. I have a much deeper appreciation for the community use that's been enjoyed for over a century. So I will say that generally we try to be opportunistic. At this location, we did buy a single family home to the rear of the Dunstan Fire Station about 9 years ago. We've since demolished that building. It was just in poor shape, again, to protect our interests in the fire station. So we try to take advantage of opportunities when they present themselves.
So did this go on the market really? Like, in practical terms, like, or pretty much did we put in a bid, as soon as, did the realtor approach us and say, hey, this is going to be listed, or did it go on the market? Has it been sitting on the market for a while, or what was the?
Actually, the story is Chief Moulton is a Mason and was aware through his Mason contacts that this was happening. I found out on a Thursday or Friday, made some inquiries, and I think Tuesday the following week, it went live on the MLS system. So it did hit the open market. I can't verify, but the listing broker advised that they did receive at least one other offer, and they chose they chose ours. And I think it has as much to do with who we are and the confidence that they have that we'll provide good stewardship for the building. That's an important part for them.
Okay, great, thanks.
Any more questions for Tom? Councilor Caterina?
Yeah, Tom, could you talk to, and I know it's anecdotal, but your understanding of how the Masons are supposedly using the proceeds of the sale, from what you've been told?
Yeah, I asked the question directly of the listing broker, who happens to be an active member of this Masonic Lodge, so I take him to be a credible source. He mentioned that the entire proceeds will go back into the community, and I inquired further, and he said that there are several pre-existing philanthropic associations, if you will, that the Masons have with different organizations. He didn't elaborate as to which ones those are, but apparently the proceeds of the sale will go back through philanthropy of one sort or another, and he indicated that they would stay local, so to speak.
Yeah, I just think that's an important thing for folks to be aware of.
Okay. Again, I don't really have any objective here except for it's slated for the agenda. So next week. So as long as the conversation seems appropriate, it'll stay on the agenda. So did anybody want to add any other comments? Councilor Hamill, then Councilor Anderson.
Yeah, I just want to say I had the opportunity to go on the site walk with Tom and staff, and I think the building definitely impresses me as something that could be useful. It's one of those spaces where people have mentioned it's a Grange. People used to gather in Grange halls all the time, and as we've moved away from farming in Scarborough, we've actually lost several Granges. So I've been I was impressed by the building. I was impressed at Tom's responding to the opportunity. And I think the response we've gotten so far from the public has been very positive and pretty consistent. So, I think this is something we should pursue, and I'm eager to hear the feedback from the next steps. But I am, pretty positive about this and supportive, and think it's something we need to work on when preserving our heritage, our historic heritage.
Thank you, sir. Councilor Anderson?
Yeah, I just want to talk back to something that Councilor Johnson brought up about the fire station expansion. And I think I agree with the notion that we want to try and preserve that property as best as we can historically. But is there a solution where that can happen and it can be part of a future fire station expansion? Because I think that's going to be the real need in a few years, and that's the real strategic value of the property, is having that space that we can expand into, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think it's a great thing that we have that opportunity. But I know when I read the comp plan and in there it talked about needing space for dormitories and bedrooms and things like that, which that space could potentially serve in the long term. So I don't think that should be off the table, that this could be part of that expansion plan. But I think if we can make sure that we're preserving the historic nature along the way, or make that a requirement, I think if that could be a solution, I think that would be great. When it comes to using the space for recreational services, kind of like what Councilor Gleifstein brought up, the parking seems to be a little bit of a challenge. So trying to think through how can we actually, allow people to come to that space and use it, would be something to think through depending on how we want to use that space. But at the same time, there's also a lot of other things I feel like that are in the pipeline to help with community space. And so it would be nice to know like what we're doing overall and how this fits into the problem or the need we have around recreational space for the community to do things like meetings, seniors, because I feel like, again, there are a lot of things happening that might meet that need. And so just, are we really gonna use this space and utilize it in a way that's gonna be advantageous?
Right. Yeah, I envision a transit stop right in front.
Yeah, it's a bus stop, John. Yeah.
Now, I would point out, I think Councilor Hamill mentioned this, and he mentions it, I think, based on his intimate knowledge of Pine Point and the Dunstan area. That area is generally underserved. We don't have many public facilities and opportunities in that area. It's also one of the areas, kind of West Scarborough, that is seeing sustained growth. So any opportunity that we can enhance opportunities, would we ever construct this building with its configuration and floor plan? Of course not, because it doesn't lend itself to widespread larger uses. But I think there's still a number of very important, valuable community uses that we could put this to with fairly little investment.
Yeah, I think I just echo somewhat selfishly, but it's my side of town, and there really isn't, this is not an indirect knock, but it's almost a forgotten side of town when it comes to gathering spaces and places to go that are within 3 to 4 miles of your house. I was just in my own driveway outside with talking to my own parents, and we were discussing places to meet for Christmas, because we were looking for a larger place, and we were actually talking about renting out a golf course hall or what have you. So it was funny because it was an immediate thing where if community service ever does, to me, there's nothing stopping community service from generating modest revenue by renting out the Grange Hall, so to speak, for functions. And it struck me that we were literally just having this conversation, and we kicked around the public safety building or a golf course or what have you. So it was actually a real life example of how it might serve a family in that side of town. Councilor Clucci and then Councilor Gleisting.
Yeah, I definitely support this. I want to make sure that we've dotted all our I's and crossed all the T's. I appreciate the report from the engineer. I think his comments were insightful, and it's good to know what you're getting going in. And I think he did a good job of explaining the ADA requirements. And, like Paul was saying, I think one of our primary responsibilities is to provide places to gather or to cross pass or interact. And I think that really can help build the fabric of a community. I think you've got that in Higgins Beach, where they have an association, a community area. You've got that in Prouts Neck, Pine Point to some extent with the firehouse. I think it's missing in the Dunstan area. And I think this is someplace that could help bring that sense of community to that area that has been growing quite rapidly, actually. So, like Tom said, I don't know that we would build it, but it's a part of our character. It's a part of our history. I think we should protect it. And I think it could be beneficial. I think it's something that could be used and would add value to the community. So thanks for pursuing it and for all the hard work everybody's done.
Councilor Gleisting, I think you're going to get the last word if there's nothing else. So Councilor Gleisting.
Yeah, so I mean, if this wasn't historic, it would definitely be a difficult proposition for me because of the limited parking and because it sounds like it needs quite a bit of work, and it's going to be another venue that we have to support. And I think mostly because if we do end up building a consolidated school, we're going to have 3 school properties that will be vacated. And then we do have, right now, we're using space at the House of Lights, which, it's got some overlap function, I think, with what we're talking about. And yes, maybe it's not quite that part of town, but it is more towards the west. And it's really good divided space where, you could have senior activities during the day and aftercare activities in the afternoon. So, I wish we did at this point have a little more foresight and vision about, what's going to happen with all these properties in town. Because it does feel like this one just could end up being something that, you know, really doesn't end up getting very widely utilized and then becomes, you know, just part of the expansion of the fire, which, as John Anderson said, certainly has value if that's something we need. But, you know, if we are buying it for historic purposes, you know, we need to keep an eye on preserving that part of it at least. And, you know, maybe some type of, you know, Scarborough Museum or something like that. If it turns out that, you know, oh, and don't forget, we're talking about a sports center at the Down. So, you know, it's a good short-term solution maybe for I think, you know, being able to maybe have some senior gatherings, which, you know, we certainly could use some senior space. And I think, you know, Todd could probably have folks get on the bus and take folks up there for events on the senior events. But yeah, it's a tough one only because for me personally, just not really having a good handle on the vision yet, and just taking on one more property in town, it's you know, it's a definite challenge.
Okay, thank you. If there's no others, I think we will adjourn. I'm not seeing any other. So with that, I will see, we're going to see each other right back here at 6 o'clock tomorrow. And Mr. Anderson, it will be your show at 6 o'clock tomorrow. And are you going to stay remote and run it remotely, Councilor Anderson?
What do you think would be better, or what generally works better with this group?
I think this would be okay since there's only 2 of us or 3 of us here, that you'd see us if we, you know, you can see my hand up, I assume, right?
Yeah, I can see it.
I think we'll be okay. I think it'll be fine. So, all right, everybody, enjoy your evening and we will see you tomorrow at 6.
I'll be in touch, John.
All right, thank you.
See you
Thanks
guys.
very much.